I'd like to now welcome our Chief Executive, Paul Simshauser. Paul's had a very busy year, from talking turkey with suppliers and developers overseas and presenting on energy matters to international audiences, through to parking himself on a veranda in downtown Hughenden to chat with the local traditional owners. Safe to say he's been everywhere and all at once. As always, Paul has a wealth of insights to share with us all, so please join me in welcoming him to the lectern to share his State of the Network presentation this morning.
Thanks very much, Nicole. Holy smokes, that's a big audience. Good morning, everybody, and thanks very much for joining us once again for our big event, as it is inside Powerlink, and a big thanks to all the Powerlink team members who've worked furiously to pull this event together once again. Can I just start by acknowledging the traditional owners and the lands in which we gather and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I've got my usual sort of playbook that I'll run through today. For those of you who are used to seeing me at the CEDA events, we won't be doing the Alan Kohler session on steroids today. I'll have a few more words in the slides and a few less charts, but the content nonetheless I hope you'll find really interesting. We thought each year before we pull this slide pack together, I sit down with a bunch of Powerlinkians and Gerard Riley in particular, and the two of us talk through what our sort of thematic ought to be each year ahead, given what we know, what we've seen and what we can see into the future. And I guess when we sat back and thought about where we're at as an industry, and these are just arbitrary dates, of course, we happen to be in 2024 and 2020 onwards in Queensland happen to be a pretty interesting point in time, as you'll see later on in some of the slides. But that first stage of the transition really started to fire up here in Queensland from a renewables perspective. From around about 2020, that was when we started seeing a huge increase in investment commitments. And I guess you can see on the board there those 6 chips, those components. Policy foundations were important. It was around about that, late 2019, 2020 when net zero started to become a thing here in Australia. It had been, percolating around a bit earlier in Europe, but it was really around that time here in Australia that it started to get the attention of corporates, and you started seeing ASX-listed companies make those announcements on the bourse. The 20% renewable target had technically been filled, yet we've seen billions of dollars of investment flow since then. So it's really been led by capital markets, led by supply chains, led by customers, and of course, as you all know, in our part of the world, households have had a huge role to play, and renewables have truly dominated all the entry statistics. And up until now, we've probably managed to find a lot of low-hanging fruit. Proximity to networks being good, and with this rapid run-up in intermittent resources, the networks have performed really well. And when you look at the whole East Coast performance of all networks from a resilience and reliability perspective, numbers are pretty good. They're the best they've been in a decade. And I guess the other thing that's been a real standout at the tail end of this period is the economics of batteries. So I'm sure you're all aware the cost of the packs has come down pretty significantly and in a fairly short period of time. But when you rack and stack the world's 39 electricity markets end to end and then go and look at where is the best place on the planet to put batteries, as it turns out, it's here in Queensland, followed closely by some of the southern jurisdictions in the NEM. And unsurprisingly, we've got a lot of interest in batteries. Why is that? Well, Sunshine State probably gives it away. We've got a lot of energy that we need to move through time. And of course, we really love moving it through space. We're going into this second phase, and I think all of you are probably intellectually or physically sort of starting to experience that. The policy settings, you won't get policy certainty. If you want certainty, go and invest in bonds. Our industry is not for you if you think you need certainty to do stuff. It is a risky industry. It always has been on the generation side. What you can expect out of our policymakers and what we should anticipate or hope for is policy predictability. If you think about it in the context of the trilemma, or as my chair would say, the quadlemma, but let me just focus on the trilemma for a moment, and then because we'll be talking about the quad later on. If we see prices start to spiral out of control, you should expect that policymakers will do something. policymakers, our politicians can't allow our market to injure households. You can't do that and sit back and idly and hope that everything will correct itself. So we should expect that policy will drift in that direction, and it will start to make trade-offs with other parts that we think are important, like decarbonisation. If we start to see security of supply breaches, we should anticipate that policy will start moving in that direction. And similarly, if you've got those two under control, you get the licence to then go and hit the decarbonisation button. So that's what I mean by those policy settings. It's all about the predictability of it. And once you understand the predictability of policy and policy makers, you get some clarity over what to invest in, how, when, and why. And in doing so, one thing that I think we've all got to try and keep chipping away at are those approval processes. We've done a lot of work inside our organisation. We've signed the first MOU with the Commonwealth Department to try and get. There's no such thing as a bypass lane, but in a fast lane for EPBC approvals. We know that we've got a lot of cost pressures, particularly in the transmission part of the supply chain. I'm talking to a bunch of our big customers last night. They've mentioned those who've got global footprints. Renewable projects are looking pretty expensive on the generation side as well in Australia. So innovation to actually start to manage those cost pressures is going to become enormously important to our organisation and the industry for that matter. Community engagement, I don't need to say any more about that. I think everyone in the room understands that. And of course, just over the last, the year's not done yet, but we're well over 1,000 hours this year of negative spot electricity prices. There's 8,760 hours in a year, over 1,000 negative. That's telling you we need storage. We need to start moving a bit more of that energy through time. Just in terms of investment, the team were very excited when we worked out policy settings, because it means investment plus Paul Simshauser equals megawatts by that metric there. But on a serious note, the investment and the right policy settings will get you the megawatts. And the message that we at Powerlink have been given, our political masters in 1 William Street, right from the get-go in 2020, and we will keep delivering this message, is let the market rip, stay out of the way, and that is the unambiguous message I get from all of our renewable investors as well. These dots there just show, so you've got the 5 states listed up there on the board at the moment, and those black markers just give you just a sense of where their maximum demand is, just as a reference point. Other than that, it's got no real significance. We've really been building a lot of renewable energy across the East Coast over the last 10 years, and if we drop it into 2 buckets, 2014 to 2019, there's the scoreboard, and you can see that Queensland probably was a bit of a laggard in some respects, and that was certainly the reputation I hear. I remember very, very clearly in sort of reading stuff online in that early 2021 period. The one thing about Queensland, though, as a state, it's been largely handed over to the market, and you can see what's happened since. So again, just to point it out there, 98.5% of transactions are on market. Only 1.5% were done by a government-coordinated auction for contracts for differences. So if you want to get stuff done, get governments out of the way, let the market go, and you'll get the megawatts flowing quickly. And this has been a common thematic inside William Street. Department of Energy, Treasury, and the policymakers, and all of the. I'm sure you will have seen throughout the election process and into the new term of government. One thing they've been very clear about, they want that private sector participation, and I think the scoreboard says, keep going. For our part at Powerlink, we've got 44 projects connected into our network. There's a bunch more, of course, connected into the LV networks of Energex and Ergon, about 9 gigawatts of plant. As at the end of October, we had 71 projects in the application stage of our broader pipeline. And in that application stage, people are actually spending a lot of money trying to reach financial close over the next 12 months, 2 years, 3 years. So this is when the meters are really running. So you can see it's a pretty busy time here. 29 gigawatts, we won't be connecting all of that. I'm sure you will appreciate in a system with 11.5 gigawatt peak, or 11 gigawatt peak demand, that's going to be a bit difficult. And in the inquiry stage, hundreds more projects with over 100 gigawatts of capacity. When you abstract back to the whole East Coast and look at the run of investment into the national electricity market. There was our early stages of coal and the gas. You can see that boom in renewables. Pretty quiet year in 2024. I've got the 2025 financial year so far. We're 3 or 4 months, whatever it is, 5 months in. It's been a lot more promising. What we have seen, though, of course, is a huge interest in firming capacity and batteries in particular, as I mentioned earlier. But across the last sort of 7 or 8 years in what I've always called the renewable super cycle, 223 projects have reached financial close, 35 gigawatts, $83 billion worth of kit. It's still a very busy time in our sector. In terms of what we think the state needs, we keep calibrating our models all the time, and this is where they're currently landing. And the wind and solar lines keep bouncing up and down depending on what we see in terms of economics and the storage side of things. And that's what we've got on the kit on the ground so far. And there's $20 billion worth of investment. 27 is the commitment or the committed capital. So a lot in the and here's the application stage. So you can see we're not worried about meeting the battery target. And then, of course, further back in the pipeline, you can see there's plenty of assets under active development. The curious absence there, though, is gas turbines. That's a bar that keeps rising each year as we get a better understanding of what our network and what security of supply looks like in an intermittent world. We know there are a lot of players that are doing work in the background on GTs at the moment. They just haven't walked through our door yet. I'm expecting sooner or later they're going to need to work out where to connect. So we're relaxed about where that's at. But those GTs are going to be hugely important, not only for active power, but for all the system services. A gas turbine with a clutch can provide inertia system strength and so on. Just in terms of, each year we spend a lot of time out in the field, surveying communities, surveying our stakeholders. It's important we do that so that we've got that evidence base and sort of don't spend too much time, being led by headlines. And I guess the key themes that we've seen coming back over and over again, the energy affordability issue is white hot at the moment. The policy settings, community engagement, and of course the things about delivery, the sort of the workforce and supply chain issues. Just in terms of where energy affordability and decarbonisation is at the moment, in the middle of what is classed in the media as a cost of living crisis for good reason. We've had extremely high inflation. We've had interest rates run up to levels that are probably quite normal for 20 years ago, but they're not normal over the last decade. And when you look at the household basket of goods and services, our property, rent and mortgages have taken a much bigger chunk in a big part of our society. There's probably about 50 or 60% of households that are really feeling that very acutely. Consequently, decarbonisation starts falling down the order. It'll be right up the top there when we've got this stuff under control, but when you're in an environment where the cost of everything feels like it's more, then you expect that to be the case. It's not unique to Australia. It's the same in a lot of other jurisdictions. The United States is one in particular where the reactions of households is remarkably similar to those economic circumstances. When we drop out into the communities in which we are developing assets, one of the things we've seen is our trust and acceptance levels just chipping down a bit. The 2024 survey results were quite interesting, though, because we had, for the first time, quite a spread. Historically, they've been all tightly ranked, and it almost didn't, at one level. I say this flippantly, but it was almost, we could probably just do 1 or 2 communities, and that was a good enough insight. Not anymore. We need to go searching a lot further. We do a big field survey every year through Voconic, and particularly in southern Queensland. We've seen those levels of trust start to get chipped away at Powerlink, and obviously, that's a big concern for us because we've had a fantastic run through to 2024. For those of you who remember, in some of the prior years, we do actually there is a regression model that predicts this stuff. They're the variables that you see up on the screen. Historically, the 3 that have been really important. distributional fairness, perceptions on how we behave and the benefits of what we do across a community. Procedural fairness, knowing that we're listening and that we are responding, and a governance process or a pressure release valve when things go wrong, knowing there's faith in that we don't dictate terms without any form of regulation. And then, of course, there was that side constraint on the support for developments locally. Interestingly enough, new variable popped out this year, and it's very dominant, and it fits with a fair bit of field research that I know some other organisations have done. Does the benefit of the project outweigh the impacts of the project in the local community? It's actually starting to become a big issue. I'm sure you will have all heard the narrative of, out in the communities we're wearing the impacts while everyone's sipping lattes in the cities is getting the benefit of it. So, I think the way the media explains it. I think this is sort of the technical interpretation. I suppose the other thing that we've also seen is impacts on road safety has actually popped up as a negative variable. So, and I just in the last week heard two of our developers just talk through a couple of road-related issues that went wrong for them. They weren't sitting there thinking, right, how can I make it a little bit frustrating for everyone in the local community by having a turbine blade hold up a school bus? But that was the outcome, and of course, a lot of work then goes into how do we make sure that doesn't happen again. This does fit back to that whole narrative around cost of living decarbonisation versus energy affordability. Just recently, the Energy Networks Association, I know Lucy Moon's in the room here with us today, but the Energy Networks Association did a huge piece of research in the field across the national electricity market jurisdictions, so a broader scale sort of process of what we at Powerlink have done. And the firm that they use is sort of very good at doing the social media listening, and they went in a slightly different, subtly different path in research than Powerlink had done. And a couple of things came out. What sort of a landing page would get a community comfortable about our industry, renewable developments, transmission network assets going into their community. When you use decarbonising and clean energy, actually it elicited a negative response. So anything about sort of decarbonising, sort of CO2, it actually doesn't work. It's sort of like, no, we'll do that somewhere else. Curiously, when you say this piece of work needs to be done to keep the lights on, it scores really well, and the communities get it. Now it's a negative, and I'm not sure as an industry we necessarily want to rely on a stick to convince people this is the right thing to do. The one that sort of scored the best from a positive perspective was powering our communities, and it goes to that top variable there on that page. Benefits of the projects in the communities outweighing the costs, and so it will become increasingly important for the industry to start thinking about how benefits of anything we do, if we've got a renewable energy zone and a number of players, collectively we're going to need to think about how we coordinate those benefits to those communities. So to them it's visibly worthwhile going through this and hosting those assets. Just in terms of responding to the market, you'll recall in September 2022 we put out our playbook for the transmission backbone in Queensland. As always, the most important thing right now that we're focused on is stiffening that Gladstone region. That's really important for us. We've got a pensioner coal-fired power station. I'm not sure how its Medicare support is going, but we know it's going to get to a point where it can't be sort of extended. So it's really important that we get our network stiff and ready to go to deal with that inevitability. You'll remember that the next part of that playbook was the Barumba connection. Barumba is going to be a really important project for Queensland. It is going to hoover up a massive amount of otherwise curtailed energy. A couple of thousand megawatts of pumps is going to make a big difference, and they're going to run for a long time. They'll be ready to hoover up everything in sight, so we need that in a location that's going to be able to hoover up as much of those intermittent electrons as we can. From there, the plan was to go north and out to Hughenden and so on. One of the things that we've noticed, though, when we sit back and look at the cost of transmission, it's really expensive now. The costs of what we are doing now bear no resemblance to what we were doing only 4 years ago. Everything feels like it's at least doubled, which means if we're going to do transmission, we've really got to make it count. And we've got to try and do as little of it as is humanly possible. when we stared back and look at we've got this fabulous system where all of your projects are sitting on our dashboard. We can zoom into areas and actually see them all come to light, no matter where they are in the development chain. We couldn't help noticing if we just move that line over here, we're pretty confident we could avoid 300 kilometres of 275 kV connections running back to that backbone. So we've started that journey now of moving that inland. In the process of doing so, it also enables us to revisit that Barumba connection and change it from green back to white being our 275 kV network. It's going to save a lot of money, I'm sure you'll appreciate. 500 kV transmission lines versus 275. 275 is a lot cheaper. If you look at a 500 kV substation, it eclipses the size of the Melbourne Cricket Ground. It makes it look small. That's how big those 500 kV subs are. So going back to 275, we know and love that stuff, and it's that's a great outcome for us. So we're spending an inordinate amount of time trying to work out how do we make everything count. That's where our renewable energy zones came in as well. We don't try to solve world peace with each renewable energy zone. The design of these things is intended to be short, sharp, punchy, and the lowest cost we can get away with. We've got 3 in flight, and I'm very pleased to announce that Western Downs was energised this morning. By the way, I told the guys, if you can't energise, put a damn AA battery in it so I can say it's energised. Anyway, we energised that this morning, which was a great achievement for us, and we've now got moving on to our next 3 at Calliope, and of course there's one planned around Darling Downs, given the some pretty clever activity by the WinLab team. Where we have, I think, done well with these renewable energy zones so fast has been speed of execution. So we've actually got these 3 built. We were drawing them on whiteboards in early 2021, and we've got them energised. They're done. We're finished. Now we're moving on to the next 3. So we've done these things really, really quickly, and it's super low cost. Each of them came in, at a few $100 million. They're not, massive hosting capacity, but what you see, their network hosting capacity. If you see 2,000 megawatts, you get 2.5 to 3 gigawatts of renewables into that when you get the right mix and blend of assets. And we'll keep going down that path. The one thing I would sort of telegraph is 2 things. First of all, environmental EPBC Act approvals will start to slow down some of our next few. We'll also, supply chain issues are slowing us down, and the costs of them are moving away from us a bit. That's okay, we'll still get the job done, but it just means each time we do these things, short, sharp, punchy, and trying to get the that balance between scale and cost for consumers and for connecting generators. We've been out to the market on the RES model. We've been very much market-led on our renewable energy zones. We've been consistent about that advice to 1 William Street. We give ourselves that same advice. We go and look in the mirror and say it out aloud. Market will tell us where to do these things. We'll tell you where good ones are, but we wait for the market when they're ready to go, not sort of try and design things around an auction and an event. Most people in this room will understand just how hard it is to get a single renewable project over the line. That sort of business development manager at the final days there has got their fingers and toes in all sorts of dikes, trying to hold the project together, because just getting one over the line is so complex. The idea that you could get multiple projects reaching financial close at the same time is just completely delusional, and we understand that. So the whole idea of these renewable energy zones is, we'll bring some patient capital, put it on the table, and make sure we've got a couple of good anchor tenants, and away we go, and warehouse a bit of that idle capacity while the market catches up. There's been wide support for the approach and conditional support for some aspects of it. No, I won't relitigate everything on the screen, though I'm sure you can all read it. What I do want to zero in on is conditional support for planned curtailment. I need you to support planned curtailment, and I'm going to explain to you why that's the case. First of all, if you think that sort of no curtailment is likely in your part of the woods, in your network connection, that's fine. Imagine everyone's got that. You're just going to get economically constrained off when everyone else gets built in. Right? And we're going to build more transmission than is required, and we'll start to lose the support of policymakers on the way, because it's going to cost more. And I'll show you what that looks like. Imagine you've got a 275 kV network. Here's our renewable energy zone, just a radial, heading out from one of our nice big subs in a neat part of the network. How much wind and solar can you put into that 275 kV line? Now, just to walk through the mechanics of it, during summer ratings about 1,500 megawatts, winters about 1,900 and about 1,700 megawatts in the mild seasons. So you can see here, 50 iterations in a simulator, about 900 megawatts of solar and 1,750 megawatts of wind. Given the wind and solar resources in this particular location, 5 or 6 years of 30-minute data, and historic market prices, and adjusting a bit for merit order effects. So there's a scenario where no one's really curtailed off at all. Let me show you what it looks like in our open access regime, where we plan a bit of curtailment, no more than 3% lost output over the cycle. You end up building this. Now, there's a lot of different combinations that will get the job done, but the biggest dot shows you the one that was the sweet spot. And you can see there you get another 500 megawatts of solar and you get another 300 megawatts of wind into the same network assets, and the cost of that network asset is now shared across a lot more units of output. You get 20% more output. So we go down the first path, we're going to need to build 5 renewable energy zones to the equivalent of 4 down the other path. And I think you all know getting 5 away is going to take a long time. And by the way, anyone who doesn't get in that priority access, your asset's stranded, your development asset's stranded. You might be first in one, you'll be third in another and out. The other interesting thing about this, going down this path, is when you bring in batteries. Now, I'm just going to rescale so you can see megawatts of solar on the bottom, wind on the y-axis. I'm just going to flip this around a bit. And I'll re-put these numbers. On the bottom is now the cumulative capacity of wind and solar, and we'll bring in some batteries on that bottom scale. And on the y-axis, we're now plotting the gigawatt hours. So there's our open access regime. You remember that the megawatts were spread, but actually all those different spreads produce a very tight range of megawatt hours. You can see how closely they are. When you add in a battery, one that's sort of a portfolio battery, so owned by one of the wind or solar projects and plays nicely in the sandpit, you actually get more megawatt hours out. So the renewable zone becomes more productive, and you get more megawatt hours out the door, and that's good for consumers and fabulous for the overall costs of a power system. Going back down that priority path, it was a lot lower output. It was down to 7,100. If we have rival batteries turning up inside a renewable energy zone, actually things get worse, not better. You actually lose a lot of output because the battery's starting to compete for line access in that renewable energy zone during that period. Now, I'm a market economist. So I've spent my whole life being wired over competition is good, and of course it is. There's plenty of places in our network where you can do batteries, but we probably need to think carefully about whether we want rival batteries inside a renewable energy zone that's designed to hoover up renewable energy. Remember, batteries don't make it, they move it. If we're going to move it, we need to make sure each time we do these renewable zones that it really counts, because the cost of doing transmission, I'll keep going back to it, it's expensive. We've got to do as less of this as is humanly possible. We've got 152 bulk supply points. There's oodles of places you can do good batteries. Inside renewable energy zones as a rival probably is not going to make a great deal of sense. By the way, I don't know how we ever enforce that stuff, but sort of some early stage thinking and advice to government, that'll be pretty high on our agenda. Just finally, just quickly, our rooftop solar PV, of course, the highest take-up rates in the world here in Queensland, followed closely by South Australia, over 6 gigawatts in a power system with a 11 gigawatt peak demand. As always, our minimum demand profile is looking interesting. From 2012 through to 2017, sort of not really much to see, but it was around about 2017 where those, the solar PV prices went into a new zone, and households started putting mini power stations on their roof, and way up into the high kilowatts. And you can see after that we started seeing the middle of that daytime load really start to run its way down. It's a big issue for the industry. We are going to have to work out how to. Batteries coming in is going to help tremendously. Coordination of those would be ideal, but that's not the world we're in at the moment. But we're sort of watching that with very keen eyes. You get down to about 2,000 megawatts, and sort of, pretty sure you all remember, we're not quite sure how to hold the grid together at that point. And we can't export our way out of this because, rooftop solar PV has just exploded everywhere. There's over 20 gigawatts on the east coast of Australia, and it is just rising inexorably year on year. This has meant that the operating envelope of our network has increased very significantly. We're now seeing swings of, from peak to trough, almost 8 gigawatts, which does make it, of course, interesting for generators in ramping on some of those tougher days, and of course, how we manage the network as well. I've spoken a lot about how expensive transmission is feeling at the moment. I just want to talk to you about sort of what we're trying to do inside our organisation to make sure that we make this stuff count. Winners are winners. It was nice to win this award a couple of weeks back, the FinReview Energy Innovation Award. That was for the line stringing we did by drones in the GenX line. It was 50 kilometres of lines that were strung by drone. That's the longest stringing in the Asia-Pac region this year. So that was pleasing to see. There's a bunch of other things though that I often reflect on in what we do and what we've been chipping away at and what we've been doing well for a long time. We're one of 2 utilities in the world that does live substation work. We've got teams that are put on these they look like a spacesuit to me. And these teams are bonding on to 275,000 volts and going to work, and similarly with our live lines crews. And what that means is you don't get constrained off when we're doing work. You won't believe the measures we go to keep our network available for you. I was with a bunch of our clients last night on the connection side and sort of just reflecting on, we ran out the northern part of our network on an N-0 basis for 6 months. 4 lines going into Cairns. We had 1 running for 6 months just to manage system strength constraints to make sure a bunch of renewable generators were able to commit. By the way, if we lost that line, I would have had a short but spectacular career as the CEO of Powerlink. But nonetheless, we did have a pretty quick playbook to restore things, and we probably would have had to do things differently. But the one message I would give to all the investors into our state, we are obsessed with making sure our network is as available as is humanly possible all the time. If there's switching done, and there are times where you might get shaken off for an hour or so, I can assure you there is teams working feverishly to get you back online again. Our wide area monitoring, protection and control, we were the 2nd utility in the world to roll that out, those WAMPAC panels, and to those renewable developers in the room who've taken them up and put them in, thank you very much. I just want to explain what that means. Historically, and again, let me just pick the north of our state. If you've got, storms coming through, lightning strikes, there will be moments where we'll need to de-energise lines, to deal with potential contingency events. These WAMPAC panels allow us to run our network to the absolute edge of its operating envelope. Rather than start to run lines down 30 minutes before the lightnings come through, we will run it right to the point. And if a lightning strike hits, our panels have got 160 milliseconds to do the switching. And at the moment, our teams have got them running at 120 milliseconds, so they're working a charm. That means we're not de-energising on a whim and a prayer. The line phase lifter, we've worked out how to peel lines out, put new towers in without de-energising, which has been fabulous. I mentioned the line stringing. We've just trialling robotic spaces for when you've got 2 circuits running, 2 cables, a robot running along and putting those spaces in rather than people in cherry pickers or heaven forbid, helicopters banking. And with our footings for towers, it takes a team of about 20 people and 1 day to put a set of footings in. And then you're waiting up to 28 days for that cement to cure. We've started trialling putting sensors in those cement footings. One pilot that we ran, the weakest part of the cement had actually cured in 69 hours, as opposed to 28 days of sort of the rule of thumb. So you can imagine what that technology means from a productivity perspective in terms of rolling through and doing lines construction and assembly. The other thing is we've actually started, and in one of our projects right now, one of our connections in central Queensland, screw piles, where 5 people, 3 sets of foundations per day rather than 1 and 20 people. So we are doing our absolute level best to chip away at it. And just finally, for those who were in that CEDA lunch earlier this year, and I probably scared the bejesus out of you with this slide, so circuit breakers, reasonably important bit of kit for anyone who's sort of connecting. Price of those up 81%, particularly driven by Ukraine war, Inflation Reduction Acts and so on. And the worrying thing for us was the lead order times had blown out to 4 years. I said that knowing full well at the time that, we had a team chipping away on this over about an 18-month period. In fact, Rakesh I know is here in the room with us today. He and his team have managed to orchestrate with one of our suppliers a technology transfer from one manufacturing facility around the other side of the world to a bit closer to our shores. That transfer has been done extremely well. We've done our factory acceptance testing on multiple occasions, and we've sort of got that back down, we think, to about 1 year lead order time again, and we did manage to chip a bit off the price as well, which was really pleasing. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for me. Thanks very much, and thanks again for coming today. It's great to see you all here.